Steel and salt, due south. 3 Imperial armies gather in Mariv, the Golden Axe, the Seventh Wave, and the Winter Sun. They have spent the last season securing the dominion of the Imperial Orcs, and now they are on the move again. The Sept of the Brine Turtles, the Orcs of Fleshark, watch with uncooperative suspicion. There is no welcome for the Empire's forces in the town of Furel, or anywhere in the southernmost region. Rather, there is a palpable fear that the armies are gathering to purge them, to crush the people of the Brine Turtle, perhaps to punish the warriors of the Sept who still fight for the Grendel. The presence of a Varushkan army in particular seems to raise the spectre of imminent slaughter. But the armies are not here for the Sept. After a few days to lay out their plans and gather their forces and allow roughly 1,000 soldiers led by independent captains to join them, the Empire's forces march across the border into the largely unknown territory of Ireed. The Brine Turtles watch them go, an undercurrent of resentful but impotent anger eddying in their wake. The Varushkans lead the way. The Golden Axe is enthusiastic about the opportunity to conquer new lands, to bring the whole territory under the Imperial banner as they did in Ossium, the Barrens, and most recently Mariv itself. Close behind them come the Winter Sun, the Imperial Orcs equally eager to claim new land for the Empire. Finally, the highborn Seventh Wave, their scouts already spreading out into the unfamiliar land south of Mariv, seeking opportunities to gather as much information as they can about the land, ideally to find some kind of route to the Isle of Zemrus, although how practical that will prove is difficult to say. Ireed is largely unknown to the Empire. There are trade routes south from Mariv that cross into the territory. 5 years ago, the Imperial Senate supported a scheme to map the bay that recorded the shape of its coastline, but said little about the interior other than it was as arid as Mariv is to the north. There is a Grendel city here with the unlikely name of Gam Yakduv, the seat of Salt Lord Azure, and that surely means that somewhere in the territory there is Mithril. As with Mariv, there are a number of odd monuments there. The giant heads that line the cliffs south of Gam Yakduv, for example. But the first landmark the Empire encounters is the eerie petrified forest, and it is there that they encounter a serious obstacle to their plans. Trees of stone. The petrified forest seems to stretch across most of the border with Mariv. The Orcs of the Broken Shore call it the Cravencloche, and the observations of ship captains have done little to prepare the army for how unsettling it is. An entire forest that seems to stretch from the steep cliffs to the eastern mountains, where every single tree seems to have somehow turned to stone. The soil is loose and dangerously dry, and the tramp of armoured boots cannot help but throw up choking clouds of dust and ash. Soldiers are forced to fashion makeshift masks from scarves and blankets to cover their mouths and noses, or risk hacking coughs brought on by inhaling too much of the fine substance. In a few scattered cases, those who get the ash in their wounds suffer a uniquely horrible form of infection. The skin, flesh and bone around the wound begin to petrify. As long as it is treated quickly with a poultice of marrowwort and fresh water, the infection can be arrested, but a few Imperial soldiers lose limbs entirely before the cure is discovered. This need to ensure wounds remain clean puts even more pressure on the army's reserves of drinking water, and it soon becomes a valuable resource. Requests are sent back north to secure more. Thanks to the rarity of fresh water in Mariv and the uncooperative nature of the Septs who effectively control access to it, this turns out to be more of a challenge than initially anticipated. Rationing is imposed to ensure the army does not run out, while new supplies are being arranged. Food likewise needs to be conserved. The only creatures that live in the petrified forest appear to be a species of large grey scorpion the size of a small dog, with thick scales and a vicious stinger. They mostly flee the advancing armies, but there are still a few tragic incidents involving smaller creatures in the enticing depths of soldiers' boots. There's no obvious sign of what is responsible for the destruction that has clearly been visited on this place. Examination of the trees shows that they are solid stone, but the sheer number of them and the intricate detail leaves no doubts that at one point they were living wood. There are also signs here and there of logging camps, although clearly picks and hammers are more suited to the task of harvesting these stone trees than axes. It is not initially clear why the Orcs of the Broken Shore might choose to do so, until by pure chance a highborn scout discovers a small amount of what appears to be petrified ambergelt in one of the more recently abandoned camps. This red-yellow material is clearly valuable, beautiful when polished and perhaps with hidden properties. There's little time to determine what these properties might be, or how common the material is, because at the same time the scouts are uncovering it, the Empire has its first encounter with the Grendel Orcs. Northward Ho. Rather than face destruction at the hands of 4 Imperial armies, the warriors of the Brine Turtle Sept quit Mariv last season. They clearly spent the season resupplying and joining up with the Hamsin, where most Grendel armies are made up of orcs of the Broken Shore, from the septs ruled by the Grendel rather than the Grendel themselves. This army is an exception. They fight with steely discipline, and it is obvious that many of their soldiers are from wealthier backgrounds than the run-of-the-mill orc warrior. Their officers in particular are equipped with both finest quality weapons and armour, and enchantments to help them fight and lead more effectively. Indeed, they are leading the way north through Cravenclosh to launch an attack into Mariv, and seem almost as surprised to see the Imperial armies as they are to see the orcs. The Broken Shore armies immediately fall back, but only to establish a defensive line. Both armies seem to be supernaturally aware of the best tactics to use to block the Imperial advance. A game of cat and mouse ensues between their commanders and the captains of the Winter Sun, who have been blessed with supernatural strategic insight. The Grendel are cautious, but they have no interest in letting the Empire push into Ireed, and seem committed to trying to push them back over the border. While at first the Imperial forces have a clear advantage of numbers, the Brine Turtles in particular know the terrain much better than they do. Within a week, significant reinforcements arrive from the south, nearly 10,000 additional soldiers seemingly drawn from the garrisons of Grendel fortifications. They are led by Commander Mariol, the granddaughter of Salt Lord Azure, and the majority represent the household troops of the ruler of Gam Makduf. They are a stark contrast to the soldiers of former Salt Lord Essan. Brutal and uncompromising, they seem to take the intrusion of the Imperial armies as a personal affront. While the Petrified Forest is hostile, the Varushkan seem least affected of the Imperial forces. Indeed, it is the Varushkan who first discovers that whilst they are dangerous to hunt, the giant scorpions of the Cravenclosh are quite edible, and Draugr in particular find their peculiar meat distinctly palatable. They excel at preserving water and seizing it from the Grendel forces, who, well aware of the challenge of navigating the Petrified Forest, have brought extra rations with them. The Winter Sun back the Varushkans, while looking for any sign of inhabitants in the Petrified Forest. As the Imperial force pushes south, they begin to see more signs of habitation, but there seems to be no actual settlements in the Cravenclosh itself. Unsurprising, given the choking ash and the lack of anything approaching water or food. Where the Golden Axe seek out every attempt to engage the Grendel and push them back, the Imperial Orcs maintain a more balanced footing, defending where the Broken Shore forces attack, but pushing after them when they retreat. At the same time, the 7th Wave focus on getting a better understanding of the lay of the land, not just in the Cravenclosh. They are by no means able to create a map, but they do manage to get a feel for Northern Ireed. It's the Highborn who identify the 2 fortifications that protect the territory, the walls of Stormlord's Rise and the castle of Benegahoin. They are also adept at finding paths through the Petrified Forest to intercept the Grendel and block their attempts to flank the Imperial forces. It's clear that it is Commander Mariol who has taken charge of the Grendel forces, and that some of the Hamsin commanders in particular resent her doing so. If they had successfully made it to Mariv, it would have been the wealthy captains of the Hamsin who had been able to claim all the glory of facing the Empire. Now that their strategy is in ruins, it is Mariol and the forces of Lord Azure that command the defence of Ireed. This friction is apparent to the Winter Sun in particular. Their supernatural acuity picks up on the weaknesses caused by the arrogant Hamsin being slow to respond to certain opportunities that would have required them to back up the garrison of Gam Yakduf. These weaknesses dry up quickly. It's clear Commander Mariol has taken steps to assert her authority. The Brine Turtles work reasonably well with the defenders of Ireed, certainly better than they did with the forces of Salt Lord Essan. Their main interest seems to be in probing the Imperial forces, looking for any opportunity to get scouts and skirmishers past their lines, presumably to try and make contact with their setmates in Fleshach. The Turtles are strong and resilient, heavily armoured against the weapons of their foes, but they are by no means stealthy. Those few that do manage to evade Imperial patrols are quickly intercepted by the unconquered scouts of the 7th Wave. Slow retreat. The forces under command of Mariol narrow the gap between the two sides, but it slowly becomes apparent that numbers alone will not determine this conflict. The Grendel are too cautious, too interested in preserving Orc lives and falling back rather than commit entirely to a toe-to-toe fighting. The Golden Axe take advantage of this weakness, leading the attack against the defenders and pushing them inexorably south. As the autumn equinox draws closer, it's clear the advantage is with the Empire. For all their caution, it's also clear that the 2 Grendel armies have suffered significantly more casualties in the fighting than the Empire has. Commander Mariol's forces are much more interested in slowing and containing Imperial troops than they are in killing them. There are challenges ahead, to be sure. The hostile terrain of the Petrified Forest, coupled with the difficulty of maintaining supply lines through southern Mariv alone, are going to cause difficulties for invading Ireed. But there are already plans afoot to address the challenges of uncooperative septs, and presumably Ireed is not entirely made up of poisoned petrified woodlands, so eventually an Imperial force will be able to support itself. But for now, The two forces remain locked in battle in the Cravencloche, and who can guess what tomorrow may bring? Game information. The Empire is almost halfway to conquering the Petrified Forest. They are still broadly unaware of the layout of Ireed, beyond knowing there are 2 fortifications. The General of the 7th Wave has taken the Gather Information order, so will receive additional information about the armies and forts in the territory at the event. The challenges presented by the uncooperative nature of Mareeve's septs, coupled with the difficulties of bringing supplies into the territory, mean that armies operating Ireeve are at a disadvantage. They require additional food and especially fresh water. Until these challenges are addressed, the armies operating in the territory require additional upkeep. With 3 regions, Fleshark, Eoradul and Clasern, disinclined to support Imperial troops, this means the upkeep of the armies is increased by 3/10. The Imperial Senate has appraised ways to address this problem, and hopefully they will be able to find a way to support Imperial advance deeper into the Broken Shore. Like Mareeve, Ireed is too arid for the Rivers of Life and Rivers Run Red rituals to have their predicted effects.